Hello, I am Alexander. I have a new original story for you. Enjoy watching.
The first time Liora touched the locked piano, 3 guards tore her hands from the keys as if she had set the palace on fire. One seized her by the wrist. Another snatched the candle from the floor. The third shouted for the royal healer because, beyond the velvet walls of the music gallery, the sleeping prince had just spoken for the first time in 7 months. He did not wake. His eyes did not open. His body did not move beneath the silver coverlet. But in a voice broken by sleep, pain, and terror, Prince Kalen begged, "Do not take her away." The guards froze. The queen dropped her prayer beads. And Liora, the mute kitchen girl no one had ever introduced to him, stood trembling in the doorway with bloodless fingers and no voice to explain why the forbidden instrument had answered her like it had been waiting all her life. If a story about a powerless girl becoming the one person a kingdom cannot ignore pulls you in, stay with me. And if you think you already know who the villain is, wait until you hear what the piano was built to take from her. Liora had lived in the lower kitchens of Aralis Palace since she was 9 years old, though no one agreed on exactly where she had come from. Some said she had been found at the servants' gate in winter, wrapped in a musician's shawl with no note and no name. Others whispered that she had belonged to a traveling choir that vanished during the border fever. The truth was quieter. Liora remembered a woman's hand, warm and ink-stained, guiding our tiny fingers over painted keys on a wooden practice board. She remembered a lullaby hummed against her hair. She remembered the smell of orange peel and candle smoke. But she did not remember her mother's face clearly, and she had never remembered her own voice. She spoke with a slate tied to her apron, with quick hands, with eyes people either ignored or feared because they seemed to hear what others missed. In the kitchen, that made her useful. She could read lips across a room when cooks argued over missing spice. She knew when the bread ovens were too hot by the sound of the brick. She could tell which maid had been crying by the rhythm of footsteps on the back stair. But usefulness was not the same as belonging. To most of the palace, Liora was the silent girl who carried trays, scrubbed copper pots, and slipped out of notice before anyone had to be kind. The only place she was never invisible was near music. Whenever a harp was tuned in the West Salon, she paused with a stack of linen in her arms. Whenever the chapel choir rehearsed, she found reasons to sweep the corridor twice. Notes did something strange inside her. They did not become sound alone. They became color, warmth, pressure, memory. A wrong note felt like a bruise. A true one felt like a door opening. That was why she had been warned never to go near the moon gallery. Every servant knew the rule. The eastern gallery was locked at dusk and sealed during royal mourning. Inside stood the last piano ever made by Master Arven, a black instrument veined with pale silver, its lid carved with moons, its legs shaped like sleeping swans. No one had played it since the night Prince Kalen fell into enchanted sleep. The official story was simple. The prince had returned from a peace mission to the northern border, carrying an illness no physician could name. He collapsed in the chapel before dawn, and by midday he could not be roused. The queen summoned scholars, monks, healers, relic keepers, even charlatans who claimed to bottle sunrise. Nothing worked. The prince breathed. His heart beat. But he did not wake. For 7 months the kingdom waited with him. Markets dimmed. Nobles sharpened their loyalties. Foreign envoys smiled too politely. and the queen, who had already buried a husband, sat beside her son every night and bargained with every god she had once thanked. Liora was not supposed to know any of this beyond kitchen gossip. She was not supposed to see the prince except as a shape behind guarded doors when breakfast trays were carried in and untouched medicine bowls were carried out. She was certainly not supposed to hear the locked piano calling her name. It began on the evening of the lantern vigil, when the entire palace moved as if underwater. Thousands of candles had been placed in the courtyard below the prince's windows. Citizens had come to pray, to mourn, and perhaps to see whether the royal line would end in silence. Liora was sent upstairs with a tray of sugared lemons for the queen's ladies. She took the eastern corridor because the main stair was crowded with courtiers. That was when she heard it. Not music exactly. A single low note, soft as breath beneath a door. She stopped. The corridor was empty. The moon gallery door stood at the far end, chained and locked, its brass handles wrapped in royal blue cloth. Liora should have kept walking. Instead, she stepped closer. Another note came, higher this time, and with it a memory so sharp she nearly dropped the tray. Her mother's hand over hers, pressing a painted key, a whisper she could not hear, but somehow understood. When the door opened beneath her touch, Liora did not scream, because she could not. She only stared. The chains hung loose. The lock had not broken. It had simply yielded. Inside, moonlight spilled across sheet-covered furniture. Dust floated like pale ash. At the center of the gallery stood the piano, uncovered, though every other instrument slept beneath cloth. Its black wood reflected the candles in Liora's tray. Its silver veins glowed faintly, like frost under skin. On its music stand lay a page she had never seen, and somehow knew. 3 lines of notes, a melody that matched the shape of the lullaby lost inside her bones. Liora set the tray down. She told herself she would only look. She told herself no one would know. But the closer she came, the warmer the keys seemed, as if the instrument had a heartbeat. She lifted one finger. The first note rang out like a bell struck under deep water. In the prince's chamber 2 floors above, Kaylin's hand twitched beneath the coverlet. Liora played the second note, then the third, and suddenly the gallery changed. The dust rose in spirals. The moonlight brightened. The locked windows trembled. She did not play like a trained court musician, not exactly. She played like someone remembering a language stolen before she learned to speak. The melody moved through her hands with a grief that was not entirely hers. In the royal sick room, the prince gasped. The queen stood so quickly, her chair struck the floor. Healer Taven dropped a vial and shouted for silence. But the melody did not stop. Liora could no more stop than a river could choose to climb back into a mountain. The guards arrived as the final phrase began. They saw a servant girl at the forbidden piano, saw the glowing strings, saw the royal seal on the lock lying open, and did what palace guards are trained to do when fear outruns thought. They dragged her away. The last note broke in half. Liora stumbled. Her knees struck the marble. Cold shot through her fingers into her wrists. She looked down and saw that her nails had turned faintly blue. One guard accused her of witchcraft. Another demanded to know who sent her. Liora shook her head and reached for her slate, but it had fallen beneath the piano bench. They were pulling her toward the door when the shout came from above. Not from a guard. Not from the healer. From the prince. His voice carried down the corridor like a torn ribbon. Do not take her away." Every person in the eastern wing stopped breathing. The queen herself appeared at the top of the stairs, pale hair unbound from vigil, eyes wide with a hope so violent it looked like fear. "Bring the girl," she said. Not kindly, not cruelly, like a drowning woman seeing a rope. If you were standing in that corridor, would you think Liora was dangerous? Or would you think she had just become the kingdom's only chance? Tell me in the comments, because this is where the story stops being about a forbidden song and starts being about what people will justify when hope finally answers them. They brought Liora to the prince's chamber with one guard at each elbow. It was the first time she had been inside long enough to see more than shadows. Prince Kalen lay beneath silver linen, his face thinner than the portraits in the great hall, his dark hair loose against the pillow. He was 23, old enough to have led negotiations, and young enough that sleep made him look almost defenseless. Around him stood the queen, Healer Taven, 2 priests, 4 guards, and Lord Marek, the queen's chief counselor, whose rings clicked together whenever he was thinking. The air smelled of lavender, wax, and medicine gone stale from overuse. Liora wanted her slate. She wanted distance. She wanted someone to notice that she was shaking. Instead, everyone stared, as if she had become an instrument herself. The queen approached first. "What is your name?" Liora touched her throat, then her lips, then shook her head. One of the kitchen maids who had followed, breathless and terrified, whispered, "Your Majesty, she cannot speak. Her name is Liora. She works below stairs." The queen's expression flickered. Pity, perhaps. Disappointment, certainly. "Can she write?" Liora nodded. A page was thrust toward her. Her hand trembled as she wrote. "I did not mean harm." The piano opened. I heard music. Lord Marek leaned over the words. "Convenient." Healer Taven, older than the queen, and too tired to flatter anyone, frowned at Liora's hands. "Let me see your fingers." She hesitated. He did not grab her. He held his palm out and waited. That small patience made her obey. He touched her fingertips and inhaled sharply. Cold as winter stone. The queen ignored him. She had turned back to her son. Kalen's lips moved. No sound came. Then, barely audible, he whispered, "Liora." The room changed around her. Before that moment, she had been a suspect. After it, she was a miracle. A dangerous miracle, perhaps. A low-born miracle. A miracle with flour on her sleeves and fear in her eyes. But a miracle all the same. The queen gripped the bedpost. "Again," she said. Healer Taven looked up. "Majesty." "Have her play again." Liora shook her head before she could stop herself. She did not know why. She only knew the cold in her fingers had begun to climb. Her wrists ached. Behind her eyes, the memory of her mother's hand blurred, as though water had been spilled over ink. The queen saw refusal and mistook it for defiance. "My son spoke after 7 months because of you. Whatever you did, you will do it again." Liora wrote quickly, "I do not know the song. It came through me." "Then let it come again." The words were not shouted. That made them worse. The room waited. The prince slept. And Liora understood for the first time that being needed by powerful people could feel almost the same as being trapped. If you are watching and you want more stories where the smallest person in the room carries the heaviest truth, take a second to subscribe. It helps more than you know, and it tells me you want stories that do not let power have the final word. They did not force Liora back to the piano that night. but not because the Queen changed her mind. Healer Taven insisted she be examined first. He had served the royal family for 30 years and had earned the rare privilege of contradicting grief without being dismissed immediately. He brought Liora to a side chamber, wrapped her hands in warmed linen, and asked questions she answered with chalk. When did you last eat? Did you feel pain while playing? Did you know the prince? Had anyone trained her? Did she remember her parents? At that, Liora paused too long. She wrote, "My mother played, I think." Taven read the words twice. What was her name? The chalk hovered. Liora drew the first letter, then stopped. The name was there. It had always been there. But when she reached for it, it slipped away. She pressed the chalk harder until it snapped. Taven's face tightened. He took a candle and held it near her eyes, then asked her to count backward by writing numbers. She managed easily, until he asked her to write the lullaby's first notes. Her hand moved to draw them, then faltered. The melody she had just played, the melody that had shaken the palace, was already fading at the edges. Taven opened an old diagnostic case and withdrew a shallow silver bowl filled with water. He placed one of Liora's fingers in it. Frost spread across the surface. Not cold water. Frost. Taven swore under his breath, softly enough for a priest not to hear, and urgently enough that Liora felt her stomach drop. "The instrument is drawing heat from you," he said. "Not only heat." He asked her to remember the kitchen matron's face. She could. He asked her to remember the corridor where she slept. She could. He asked her to remember her mother's shawl, orange peel, candle smoke, a hand, no face. The healer looked toward the locked door, behind which the Queen waited. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Liora nodded slowly. He took her chalk and wrote beneath her broken words, perhaps so she would not have to. "The piano takes warmth, strength, and memory in exchange for sound." Liora stared at the sentence. She had spent her life without a voice. Now she had found the one music that could make a prince speak, and it wanted to take the few pieces of herself she still owned. Taven covered the bowl. "I will tell Her Majesty she must not demand another playing until we understand the mechanism." But when they returned to the prince's chamber, the Queen was standing beside Lord Marek and 3 council messengers. The whole palace already knew. The courtyard vigil had turned from mourning to frenzy. Citizens were chanting the prince's name below. The Queen's face was wet, but her spine was straight. "At dawn," she said, "the girl will play again." Taven stepped forward. "Majesty, the cost to her may be severe." The Queen looked at Liora then, truly looked, and for one heartbeat sorrow softened her. "Child, if there were any other way, I would take it." Liora believed that. Strangely, that made it hurt more. The Queen was not a monster in a black cloak. She was a mother with a kingdom watching her windows, and she had been handed a girl no one would miss as loudly as they would miss a prince. Lord Marek added, "The realm cannot hang on a servant's discomfort." Taven's voice went cold. "It is not discomfort." "Then give it a grander name," Marek said. "It doesn't change the succession." Liora wrote one word on her slate. No. The room went silent. No one below stairs said no to the Queen. No one with empty pockets said no to Lord Marek. But Liora had already felt the song nibbling at her memories, like a mouse in the dark, and the small word stood between her and disappearing. The Queen read it. Her mouth trembled. "One short phrase," she said. "Only enough to see whether he can be reached again. If you help him, I swear you will be honored, protected, given anything you ask. Liora wanted to ask for her mother's name. She wanted to ask for the childhood she could not hold. She wanted to ask why protection always came after obedience. Instead, she looked at the sleeping prince. His lips parted. His voice returned, low and strained. No. The word was so soft that at first only Liora heard it. Then everyone did. Kaelin's brows drew together, as if in pain. Do not hurt her. The queen made a sound like a sob swallowed halfway. Kaelin? He did not wake. His hand moved against the sheet, searching for something. She is cold, he whispered. She is so cold. Liora stepped toward him despite herself. The guards shifted, but the queen raised a hand to stop them. Kaelin's fingers curled in empty air. Liora should have stayed back. She knew that. But for 7 months, everyone had spoken over his sleeping body, as though he were an altar, a symbol, a problem. He was the first person in the room to speak about her pain. She placed her chilled hand near his, not touching. His hand found hers. Warmth moved into her palm, not enough to heal, but enough to make her eyes sting. Forgive me, he breathed. Then his face smoothed, and he sank back into silence. That was the first crack in the queen's certainty. It was not enough to save Liora, but it was enough to make the room afraid of what saving the prince might mean. Dawn came without sleep. They moved Liora to a guarded chamber near the moon gallery, not a cell, but close enough that politeness did not matter. Tavin brought broth, gloves lined with lamb's wool, and a promise that he would stand between her and anyone who tried to force a full performance. He said it like a man who knew promises could be smaller than power. Liora wrote, "Why does he know me?" Tavin hesitated. "I do not know." She underlined the words. He sighed. There are old bindings between certain royal objects and certain bloodlines. The piano may recognize something in you, or in him, or both. Liora wrote, "My mother." The healer's eyes flickered again. There was once a composer at court named Myra Vale. Leora's hand froze. Myra. The name struck the air like a match, not her whole memory, but a spark. A woman laughing silently because Liora had spilled ink. A lullaby without words. Myra. Liora wrote the name again, bigger. Tavin watched her face. She vanished when you were very small. Officially, she died in a fever outbreak in the outer wards. Unofficially, he looked toward the door. Unofficially, she was involved in the making of that piano. Before he could say more, the queen entered. She wore no crown, only a plain blue gown, which made her look less like a ruler and more like a woman who had forgotten how to rest. Lord Marek stood behind her. "Leave us," she told Tavin. He did not. The queen's gaze sharpened. "Please." That word cost her something. Tavin looked at Liora. Liora nodded once. When they were alone except for Marek and a silent guard, Queen Isolde sat across from her. "When Kaelin was born, the bells rang for 3 days," she said. "Not because he was royal, because he lived. I had lost 2 children before him. He was small enough to fit in the crook of my arm, and every breath sounded like a question. I sat awake for weeks counting them." Liora did not move. The queen's eyes shone. When his father died, Kaelin was 16. He learned to smile before councils, to comfort villagers after floods, to read treaties written by men twice his age who wanted to trick him. He never complained. He said the kingdom had already lost a king and did not need to lose hope too. The queen leaned forward. "Now, hope has a name. Yours." Liora wrote slowly. "Hope should not eat people." The Queen flinched. Lord Marek's face hardened. Insolent girl. But the Queen lifted a hand. For a moment there was only the faint sound of the courtyard chanting below. Then Isolde said, "You are right." Liora looked up. "You are right," the Queen repeated, and it sounded like a confession, not surrender. "But if he dies, borders burn, houses fight. Children who have never seen this palace will suffer for our tenderness. I do not ask you because you are nothing. I ask because suddenly, you matter more than anyone." That was the cruelest truth Liora had ever heard. It would have been easier if the Queen had sneered. Easier if Marek's cold arithmetic were the only force against her. But Isolde made sacrifice sound like a bridge, and Liora could feel herself being pushed toward it by grief, duty, and the 1,000 candles outside. Lord Marek placed a document on the table. "You will be granted a pension, rooms, tutors, and a place in royal service. If your condition worsens, the Crown will provide care." Liora stared at the ink. It was a contract for the purchase of her disappearance, written in beautiful legal hand. She pushed it away. Marek's rings clicked. "Majesty, we are wasting time." The Queen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked older. "At noon," she said, "we will attempt one phrase under Taven's supervision. If the danger is greater than he believes survivable, we stop." Liora wrote, "And if I refuse?" No one answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. At noon they brought her to the moon gallery. Taven had prepared warmed stones, restoratives, blankets, and a line of chalk on the floor, beyond which no one was allowed to stand. He argued for limiting the melody to 4 measures. Marek argued for 12. The Queen said nothing, but her fingers twisted around her prayer beads until her knuckles whitened. Liora sat before the piano. The bench was too high. Her feet barely settled firmly. The sheet music had changed. The 3 lines from the night before had become 6, then 9, as if the instrument were writing in its sleep. At the top of the page, in faded ink, was a title, "The Cradle Beneath the Crown." Beneath it, in a smaller hand, 2 initials, M.V., Maera Vale. Liora's breath caught. Her mother had touched this page. Her mother had written this spell, or song, or trap. For one wild second, Liora wanted to play, only because the notes were the closest thing to an embrace she had left. Then she remembered the frost in the bowl. She laid her hands on the keys. Taven murmured, "Only 4 measures. Stop when I say." Liora began. The first notes were gentler than the night before, but the effect was immediate. The strings glowed silver. The room's temperature dropped. In the prince's chamber above, Kalen turned his head toward the sound. Liora's fingers moved with terrifying ease. After the second measure, she felt warmth leaving her shoulders. After the third, her right hand forgot the scar on her thumb from a kitchen knife. Not the scar itself, but the story of it. She saw it and could no longer remember when it happened. Taven called, "Stop!" The melody pulled. Her hands wanted the next chord. She tore them away so hard the final note clanged wrong. The gallery windows cracked from corner to corner. Liora swayed. Taven caught her before she fell. Above them, the prince cried out, "Liora!" This time his voice was strong enough for the courtyard to hear through the open sickroom windows. The people below erupted. Bells began ringing without orders. The guards smiled. Courtiers wept. Someone shouted that the prince was returning. In Taven's arms, Liora could not feel her feet. The queen ran upstairs to her son, and Liora was carried after her, because no one wanted the miracle out of sight. Kalen still slept, but tears had leaked from the corners of his closed eyes. "Stop the song," he whispered. The Queen knelt beside him. "My darling, we are trying to bring you back." His head moved faintly side to side. "Not like this." "Kalen, can you hear me?" "She is not the door," he said. "She is the key breaking in the lock." Liora, half-conscious, heard those words and understood less than she felt. The prince was trapped somewhere inside sleep, but he knew the shape of her suffering better than anyone awake. The Queen pressed her forehead to his hand. "Tell me how to save you." Kalen's lips parted. "Ask her mother." Then he fell silent. That name moved through the room without being spoken. Liora Vale. Tavin looked at Liora. Liora looked at the piano dust still silver on her fingertips. Somewhere in the palace, an old secret had opened its eyes. If this moment has you leaning closer, hit the like button, because from here, every answer costs someone something. And the question is no longer whether Liora can wake the prince. It is whether she can survive the truth of why only she can. Tavin found the first clue in a sealed archive beneath the chapel, where royal vows were stored with funeral records and treaties no one wanted remembered. He did not have permission. He took Liora anyway, wrapped in 2 cloaks, with a junior archivist who owed him enough favors to be brave for 15 minutes. The archive smelled of dust, iron locks, and old wax. Liora's strength had returned enough for her to walk, though her fingers still trembled. She kept seeing flashes of her mother, now that the name had returned. Liora bending over paper. Liora tapping Liora's nose with a quill. Liora crying while singing without sound. That last memory frightened her most, because Liora could not tell if the silence belonged to Liora or to herself. Tavin searched under Vale, under Arvin, under Moon Gallery, and finally under Crown Instruments. There they found a narrow black ledger bound with silver thread. On the first page was a royal seal from 20 years earlier, when Kalen was still a child and the old king still lived. The entry described an illness that had struck the young prince at age 3, a curse hidden in a gift from an enemy court. It had stopped his heart for nearly a minute before Liora Vale, royal composer and keeper of old tonal rites, offered a binding. She would compose a cradle to hold death away from the prince until he reached adulthood. In return, the crown would protect her line and never use the completed melody except by consent of the singer's blood. Liora underlined the last phrase with her finger. By consent. Tavin's mouth flattened. That clause is missing from the copies Marek showed the council. The next page made Leora's vision blur. The binding required a voice. Liora gave hers. Not metaphorically. Not as reputation or service. The vow took the living thread of her voice and sealed it into the piano, so that, if death returned for the prince, the instrument could call it into sleep instead. But vows made with royal seals are greedy things. The final line read, "If the keeper dies before release, the debt passes through blood until willingly ended." Liora touched her throat. She'd been born into the echo of a bargain. Her muteness was not an accident. It was inheritance. Tavin read on, face growing darker. The old king had promised protection. After his death, the records were buried. Liora petitioned to dissolve the vow when she realized the instrument could one day take her child. The petition was denied by the Regency Council during a border crisis. Weeks later, Liora disappeared. Liora gripped the shelf until her knuckles hurt. She did not need a dramatic confession. The papers were enough. Her mother had tried to save her. The palace had kept the song and lost the woman. Tavin whispered, "I am sorry." Liora shook her head, not because she wasn't hurt, but because sorry was too small a cup for what was pouring through her. She turned the last page. There, folded into the ledger, was a scrap of music in Maera's hand. Not the cradle melody. Something else. A counter theme. At the top were words written for someone who might one day read them. "For my little silent star, if they make you choose." Liora pressed the paper to her chest. For several seconds, she could not see through tears. Tavin read over her shoulder. The counter theme did not wake the sleeper directly. It altered the vow's final cadence. A musician could redirect the debt away from blood and back into the instrument itself, breaking the bargain. But the line beneath warned, the player must change the ending from obedience to refusal. The cost will be whatever the vow has no right to keep. Tavin exhaled. That could mean your voice. Liora almost laughed without sound. The vow already had that. Or your memory of the binding, he said. Or your ability to touch the old magic again. I do not know. Liora took the chalk from her pocket and wrote on the back of an old envelope. It means I choose the ending. They brought the ledger to the Queen in her private chapel. Not to the council. Not to the crowded hall. Just the Queen, Tavin, Liora, and the truth laid between them on a prayer bench. Isolde read every page. At first she resisted with the instinct of someone whose hope was being accused. She said her husband would never have hidden such a thing from her. Then she remembered, visibly, that kings hide things from queens when kingdoms are afraid. She read Maera's petition. Her fingers covered her mouth. She read the clause requiring consent. She looked at Leora's throat, then at the scrap of counter melody. I was 15 when Maera played at my wedding, she said softly. She wore blue ribbons in her hair. She made the whole chapel feel as if it had windows in the ceiling. Liora wrote, She was my mother. The Queen bowed her head, not a royal nod, a true bow, small but unmistakable. Then the crown owes you more than I can repay. For a moment, Liora wanted to forgive her. For a moment, she wanted to set down anger because the Queen's remorse looked real. Then bells sounded outside, and Lord Marek entered without knocking. He took in the ledger, the Queen's face, Tavin's posture, Leora's clenched hands, and understood enough to be dangerous. Majesty, the council is assembled. The people expect a full attempt before sunset. The border envoys are already sending riders. If we delay now, rumor will turn hope into panic. Isolde closed the ledger. There will be no full attempt without Leora's consent. Marek stared at her. The girl is bound to the instrument. Not by any law I recognize. By necessity, Tavin snapped. Necessity is not law. Marek's voice lowered. If the prince dies, there may be no law left for any of us. He was not wrong, and that made him harder to dismiss. He was not twirling a villain's mustache. He believed fear was wisdom. He believed individuals were pieces placed before a larger fire. He looked at Liora not with hatred, but with the indifference of a man who had never imagined being the piece sacrificed. The Queen ordered him out. He obeyed, but before leaving he said, At sunset, Majesty, the palace gates will be full. Mothers will bring sick children to pray. Soldiers will kneel. If you choose a servant's safety over the prince's life, be ready to tell them yourself. The door closed. The Queen sat very still. Liora realized the trap had changed shape. No one needed chains. if they could fill the courtyard with people who would never know what the song was taking. Isolde whispered, "I do not know how to be a mother to my son and a queen to everyone else at the same time." Liora wrote, "Maybe ask him." They went to Kalin. The prince lay as before, but the closer Liora came, the more restless he became, as if her presence stirred a wind inside whatever dream held him. The queen sat on one side. Liora stood on the other, Mara's counter-theme folded in her palm. Tavin placed the ledger on the bed. "Your Highness," he said, feeling foolish and doing it anyway, "if you can hear us, we need you." At first there was nothing. Then Kalin's fingers moved. The queen bent close. "Kalin, my love, should Liora play the final melody?" His brow creased. His voice emerged slowly, as if dragged through deep water. "Only if she chooses." The queen wept then, silently. "And if she does not? Then let me sleep." The words struck harder than any command. "Let me sleep. Not save the crown. Not sacrifice the girl. Let me sleep." Leora's chest tightened. She had thought of him as the person everyone wanted back. She had not considered that he might choose not to return if the price was her erasure. Kalin continued, barely audible. "Mother, I am tired of being loved like a kingdom." Isolde covered her mouth. The room itself seemed to bend around that sentence. A prince, raised as Symbol, had finally spoken as a son. Liora looked at him and felt something shift inside her. Not romance exactly, though tenderness was there. Not duty, though that was there too. It was recognition. He was trapped beneath expectation just as she was trapped beneath debt. Different cages, same palace. She wrote on her slate and held it where the queen could see. "I will not play for the crown." The queen nodded, broken but accepting. Then Liora wrote another line. "I will play for my mother, for him, and for myself." Tavin read it aloud because Leora's hands were shaking. The queen looked up sharply. "The counter-theme?" Liora nodded. Tavin said, "It may fail." Liora nodded again. "It may cost you something we cannot predict," she wrote. So did silence. The plan they made was private, because privacy was the only mercy left. At sunset, while Lord Marek prepared the council chamber for a grand performance, the queen ordered the moon gallery sealed for cleaning and sent decoy musicians to the western hall. Tavin dismissed half the guards with a false quarantine notice. The queen herself carried Liora through the old chapel passage used by royal brides on wedding mornings, because Marek had placed watchers in the main corridor. It was strange, almost absurd, that the queen who had nearly commanded Leora's sacrifice now held her elbow gently to help her climb stairs. People are rarely one thing. Grief had made Isolde dangerous. Truth was making her brave. Outside, the courtyard roared with expectation. Inside, the moon gallery waited in blue twilight. The piano's silver veins pulsed when Liora entered. The sheet music had grown again, now filling the stand in black, elegant lines. It wanted the old ending. It wanted obedience dressed as destiny. Liora unfolded Maera's scrap and placed it over the final measures. The notes did not glow. They looked almost plain. Human. Tavin set warming stones around the bench. The queen removed her own cloak and wrapped it over Leora's shoulders. "I cannot ask forgiveness before knowing whether I deserve it," Isolde said. "But I can promise this. If you stop, we stop. If you fall, we carry you away. If my son remains asleep, no one will touch you again." Liora studied her face. Then she wrote, "Even if the kingdom hates you." The queen closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was crying. especially then. A crash sounded beyond the gallery doors. Voices. Marek had discovered the decoy. Taven shoved a cabinet against the handle. "We have minutes." Liora sat. The keys were warm now, almost eager. She thought of her mother. Not the missing face, but the hand, the ink, the orange peel, the message left across years. "If they make you choose." Liora laid her fingers down. The first cord opened the room. The second pulled moonlight from the windows, though the sun had not fully set. Above, in his chamber, Kaelin inhaled sharply. The queen remained by the door, one hand over her heart. Taven watched Liora's color drain and counted measures under his breath. The melody was beautiful. That was the cruelest part. It did not sound like a weapon. It sounded like a cradle, like a promise, like every mother who had ever told a child, "Sleep, I will stand guard." Liora played through pain that was not sharp but deep, a hollowing. Warmth left her arms. The memory of the kitchen ovens faded. The name of the junior scullery boy vanished. She kept playing. At the 12th measure, the prince began speaking upstairs, his voice echoing through the walls. "Liora, listen to me. You do not owe them your life." The old melody tugged harder. The keys seemed to rise against her fingers, guiding them toward the obedient cadence. Outside the doors, Marek shouted for the queen to open in the name of the realm. Taven yelled back that the realm could wait. Liora reached the place where Maera's counter-theme began. The old music wanted her left hand to descend. Maera's scrap asked it to rise. For one terrifying instant, Liora could not remember which notes were which. Her mother's face was gone again. Her name flickered. Maera. 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 The piano drank the soundless cry from her throat. Kaelin's voice came, clearer than ever. "Do not follow the song. Answer it." Answer it. Liora understood. The vow had been built on a voice given under pressure, on a promise turned into a chain. It did not need a better servant. It needed refusal. She lifted both hands from the keys. The melody screamed without sound. Every string inside the piano shivered. Taven shouted her name. Then Liora brought her hands down, not on the next written chord, but on 3 notes from the practice board of her childhood, the little pattern her mother had used to make her laugh. Not royal, not ceremonial, not useful to a kingdom. Hers. The piano split with a sound like ice breaking on a lake. Silver light burst through the seams. The gallery doors flew open, throwing Marek and the guards back a step, not violently, but with enough force to stop them cold. The queen did not turn. She watched Liora play the counter theme. The final measures changed under her fingers. The black ink on the page loosened and crawled backward, unwriting itself line by line. In the prince's chamber, Kaelin opened his eyes. No bells rang at first. No crowd saw. No council applauded. There was only a young man waking in a dim room, gasping as if surfacing from dark water. And the first word he spoke awake was not mother, not kingdom, not crown. It was stop. Liora heard him through the walls. She had 1 chord left. The old bargain gathered around it, starving. If she played the written ending, it would take everything. If she played Maera's ending, it would take only what it had no right to keep. She did not fully know what that meant. She played anyway. The last chord was almost silent. The piano's silver veins went dark. Every string inside snapped at once, not loudly, but with a soft, cascading sigh, like a flock of birds lifting from a field. Liora fell sideways. Taven caught her before her head struck the floor. The queen rushed to them. Marek stood in the doorway, staring at the dead instrument as if the future had just disobeyed him. Liora could not feel her hands. For one horrible moment, she could not remember why she was there. Then Taven said, "Liora, look at me. Do you know your name?" She blinked. Slowly, she nodded. He held up Myra's scrap. "Do you know whose this is?" Liora stared. Orange peel, candle smoke, ink-stained fingers, the warmth of a hand over hers. The face was still blurred, but the name remained. She took the chalk with numb fingers and wrote one word, crooked but clear. Mother. Taven laughed once, a broken sound of relief. The Queen covered her face and wept. Footsteps thundered overhead. Then Prince Kalen appeared at the gallery entrance, supported by 2 attendants, pale and unsteady, but awake. Everyone bowed except Liora, who was on the floor and too exhausted to move. Kalen saw that and gave the smallest, strangest smile. "Good," he said hoarsely. "Do not start now." He crossed the room with the stubbornness of someone who had just returned from 7 months of helplessness and was already tired of being handled. The attendants tried to stop him. He shook them off, nearly fell, and lowered himself to the floor beside Liora instead of making her rise. That act did more than any speech could have. It changed the height of the room. He took her cold hand between both of his. Careful, asking with his eyes before touching. She let him. "I heard you in the dark," he said. "Not words. Music. Fear. I tried to reach you sooner." Liora wrote with effort. "You told them no." His expression tightened. "Not soon enough." The Queen knelt across from them. "Kalen." He looked at his mother, and the tenderness in its face made the pain sharper, not softer. "I know why you did it." Isolde nodded, tears slipping down. "That does not absolve me." "No," he said. "It gives you somewhere to begin." Marek stepped into the room, recovering his authority like a cloak. "Your Highness, thank the heavens. The council must be informed at once. We can contain the irregularities and present the girl as a loyal servant whose sacrifice was rewarded by royal gratitude." The room went still. Liora was too tired to be afraid, but she felt Kalen's hands warm around hers. The prince turned his head. He had been awake less than 10 minutes, but there was steel under the exhaustion. "No." Marek blinked. "Highness? There was no sacrifice. There was a choice. Hers. And there will be no story that steals it from her." The Queen stood. Slowly. Not as a grieving mother now, but as a ruler who had finally found the line she should have drawn earlier. "Lord Marek, you will leave this gallery. You will tell the council that the prince is awake and that no further use of the moon piano is possible. You will say the instrument is broken by royal order." Marek's jaw tightened. "The people will demand details." "Then they may receive a simple truth," Kalen said. "A girl saved my life by refusing to be consumed by it." It was close to public justice, but not the spectacle Marek wanted, and not the exposure the crowd would have devoured. There would be inquiries later, quiet dismissals, documents restored to archives, old debts named. But in that moment, the victory was private. A door closed against the appetite of a kingdom. Marek bowed because he had no choice. As he left, he looked at Liora with something like resentment, but also fear. Not fear of magic. Fear of a person he had counted as expendable becoming impossible to count around. In the days that followed, Oralis celebrated the prince's awakening with bells, lanterns, and songs that got half the facts wrong by breakfast. Some claimed Liora had sung with an angel's voice. Some said she had defeated a curse in single combat. Some said the queen had always known. The palace did not correct every rumor. Truth, Taven said, was sometimes a seed, not a hammer. But certain things changed quietly and permanently. The contract Marek had written was burned in the queen's hearth. The original vow ledger was copied in full, including the consent clause, and sealed under 3 authorities instead of 1. Lord Marek was sent north to oversee grain roads, which sounded like honor if you did not know it removed him from every room where succession was discussed. Queen Isolde visited the lower kitchens herself, terrifying the cooks, and asked where Liora had slept. By sunset, Liora had a room with a window, a real bed, and a desk wide enough for paper. She did not know what to do with so much space. For 2 days, she slept. When she woke, Kaelin was sitting outside her door because Taven had forbidden him from hovering inside like a guilty ghost. He looked healthier in daylight, but still thin, wrapped in a plain robe rather than royal velvet. A tray sat beside him, untouched. When Liora opened the door, he stood too fast and had to catch the wall. She raised an eyebrow. He said, "I am demonstrating princely dignity." She almost smiled. He held up both hands. "May I come in?" The question mattered. After all the doors opened and closed around her without permission, the question felt like sunlight. She nodded. He entered and looked around her new room with satisfaction and sadness. It should have happened before. Liora wrote. Many things should have. He accepted that without defending anyone. They sat by the window. For a while, neither tried to fill the silence. Kaelin seemed comfortable in it, which surprised her. Most people treated her silence like a hole they needed to throw words into. He treated it like a room they were both allowed to sit in. Finally, he said, "In the dream, I saw pieces. A child at a painted keyboard, a woman with ink on her hands, a corridor of candles, and you, always just beyond a door I could not open." Liora wrote, "I saw nothing of you." He smiled faintly. "That seems unfair." Then he grew serious. "I do not want gratitude to become another chain. You owe me nothing because I woke. You do not have to stay in the palace. You do not have to serve my mother. You do not have to be part of whatever songs people invent." Liora looked out at the courtyard, where lantern frames still hung from the celebration. Leave. The word opened inside her, frightening and wide. For years, she had belonged nowhere. The palace had used her, yes, but it also held the last traces of her mother, the broken piano, the archives, Taven, even this prince who asked instead of ordered. She wrote, "If I stay, it will not be as a servant." Kaelin's answer came immediately. "No." Then, realizing how sharp it sounded, he added, "No, never as that. As a musician, if you wish, as a scholar, as a person who can tell us all to go away." Liora wrote, "I cannot play like before. The old magic is gone." Kaelin looked relieved, not disappointed. "Good." That made her laugh silently, a breath through her nose, and his face softened, as if the soundless laugh were music enough. Later that week, Queen Isolde came to Liora without attendants. She brought a small wooden box. Inside were blue ribbons, brittle with age, and a silver tuning key engraved with Mara Vale's initials. "These were kept in the royal collection," the queen said. "They should have been yours." Liora touched the ribbons. For once, memory did not flee. She could not see Mara's face clearly, but she remembered blue at the edge of dark hair. She wrote, "Did you know her well?" Isolde sat beside her. Not well enough. I admired her. I benefited from her. I did not ask what her gifts cost. That is a kind of blindness queens are trained to call order. Liora considered that. Then she wrote, "What will you do now?" Isolde's answer was not grand. No sweeping reform declared from a balcony. No instant perfection. Begin by asking who else has been made invisible because the crown found it convenient. Then listen when they answer. It was not enough to undo the past, but it was a start that sounded harder than a speech. Months passed. The Moon Gallery was reopened, but the piano remained where it was. Black wood dim, strings broken, lid raised like a mouth finally emptied of secrets. No one repaired it. At Liora's request, it became a memorial to vows that should never be demanded and promises that must never outlive consent. Children from the city music school were allowed to visit. Some were disappointed that the famous instrument made no sound. Liora would tap the dead keys and write on her slate. Some silences are victories. She began studying composition with Taven's niece, who was patient, brilliant, and completely unimpressed by royal drama. Liora's hands never fully regained their old warmth. In winter, she wore gloves indoors. Some memories were gone for good. She never recovered the kitchen knife story. She never remembered the exact sound of the first forbidden melody, and her voice did not return. But she no longer felt that silence as only theft. Some of it was hers now, chosen, shaped, filled with ink, gesture, and music that did not consume her. Prince Kalen recovered slowly. He walked the gardens at dawn, slept badly, and refused to let anyone call his survival a miracle without also naming Liora's choice. He and Liora became friends in the way people do when they have met each other, first in pain and then in quiet. There were rumors, because palaces turn any tenderness into marriage by lunchtime. Kalen ignored them. Liora rolled her eyes at them. The truth was more delicate and more durable. He read treaties aloud while she marked the manipulations in the margins. She played simple new compositions on an ordinary practice piano, and he listened as if every plain note were a rebellion. Sometimes he spoke of the dream. Sometimes she wrote about Mara. Sometimes they said nothing at all. On the first anniversary of his waking, the Queen wanted a ceremony. Kalen refused anything that placed Liora on a pedestal. Liora refused anything that placed her in debt. So they chose something smaller. At dusk, in the Moon Gallery, with only Taven, the Queen, a few students, and the people who had earned the right to be there by listening, Liora placed Maera's blue ribbon around the dead piano's music stand. Then she sat at a small walnut instrument, brought from the school, unlocked and unbound, and played a new melody. It had no magic, no silver light, no sleeping prince calling through walls. It was only music. It began with the 3 notes from her childhood practice board. It moved through grief without kneeling to it. It ended not in a grand chord, but in a pause that invited breath. When the final note faded, no one moved for a moment. Then Queen Isolde whispered, "Thank you." Liora turned, lifted her slate, and showed the words she had written before playing. I did not save him by being willing to die. I saved him by refusing to disappear. Kalen read it and bowed his head, not to a subject, not to a miracle, but to a person. And that is where the kingdom's favorite version of the story ends, with the prince awake and the girl honored. But the truer ending is quieter. It is Liora later that night, alone in her room, opening the window to hear distant city music drifting up from taverns and courtyards. It is her taking out a fresh sheet of paper and writing Mara Vale's name at the top, not because she remembers everything, but because what remains is enough to begin. It is Kaelin knocking once and waiting until she invites him in. It is the Queen learning that love without consent can become another kind of hunger. It is a broken piano that never plays again, and a mute girl who finally understands that a stolen voice is not the same as a stolen life. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more emotional long-form stories like this, and leave a comment with your answer to this. Was Queen Isolde wrong to ask Liora to play once she knew the cost, or was she a mother trapped by a crown? I read those answers, and they shape the kinds of stories we tell next. And if you take one thing from Liora, let it be this. Not every calling is meant to be obeyed. Sometimes the bravest thing a heart can do is change the final note.